At its heart, metallurgy is an act of transformation by which a human being may fundamentally transform the makeup of his physical world. In perhaps no other geographical region is there so great a respect placed upon the metaphysical importance of metallurgy as in Sub-Saharan Africa. For many cultures in the region, the spiritual world and the physical world were fundamentally linked through the act of iron smelting, and thus to properly explore the art of Sub-Saharan iron metallurgy, we must first explore both the technology and its spiritual side. Almost all of Sub-Saharan iron metallurgy works on the principle of a direct reduction process, whereby charges of charcoal and iron oxide ore are placed into a furnace and are heated, which allows for the reaction of the oxide component with pure carbon. The carbon monoxide gas produced by the reaction is pumped out of the shaft by the airflow introduced by the tuyères. These are clay pipes usually positioned at the base of the furnace to introduce a forced or natural draft to the furnace shaft. The silicate material that was previously part of the iron ore, as well as any unreduced iron oxide, is drained off as slag. The temperature within a bloomery furnace will largely be maintained between 1200 degrees Celsius and 1300 degrees Celsius. Such a balance is important as anywhere below 1200 degrees will see a liquid slag fail to form, whereas anything above 1300 degrees will cause the iron to oxidize rather than reduce. This means that the internal temperature of the furnace is usually below the melting point of iron, and so rather than melting alongside into the slag, newly formed metallic iron will form concentric shells which fuse together to form a bloom. Bloomery furnaces will either produce wrought iron or steel. There is one direct reduction metallurgical tradition in Africa which has been proven to be able to create cast iron, but this shall be addressed later. It would be a mistake, however, to address all of Sub-Saharan Africa's metallurgical traditions as a homogeneous assembly of bloomery iron furnaces, when in actuality there is a great deal of diversity in the various processes. While the natural draft furnace was common in the dry savannas and woodlands of Sub-Saharan Africa, in the more tropical areas of Africa we start to see the use of forced draft furnaces, which utilize bellows in order to ensure that the production of iron went faster at the cost of more manpower being required to keep the furnace running. One area of particular interest where forced draft iron furnaces were used is in northern Cameroon, where the Mafa people utilized a unique metallurgical process that allowed them to create high-carbon cast iron using a bloomery furnace. The furnaces of the Mafa people are known as unique for one feature, the vertical incision of a singular tuyere down the mouth of the shaft rather than multiple around the base of the furnace. The furnace was constructed to have a narrow shaft supported by a rubble platform and was also designed to have an opening through which charges could be deposited. This would be sealed up during the smelt itself using daub and split twigs of ebony. In the seal a small hole would be cut for the slag to be drained. The tuyere served a purpose beyond providing an airflow for the furnace. Its tip was meant to melt off into the smelt, leading to both its high iron oxide and potassium oxide contents mixing in with the slag. This caused any wustite that had formed within the furnace to fully reduce into iron. The melting of the tuyere also created a slag rich in silica, which caused some amount of iron oxide to be lost. This in turn, however, allowed for a greater carbon uptake within the remaining iron ore, which allows for the high carbon products such as cast iron to be formed. So far we have discussed the physical attributes of Sub-Saharan African metallurgy, but none of the spiritual, which so greatly informed how the process was conducted. Among many societies in Sub-Saharan Africa, smelting was seen as an act of creation that was linked with concepts of birth and gestation. With the role of the iron smelter being typically taken up by a male, it was down to the furnace itself to perform the female role. To this extent would the Fipa people of Tanzania perform the same rituals and decorations during the construction of a furnace that they would for a bride. Furthermore, all the way down in Zimbabwe, the Shona people tend to model their furnaces like fertile young women, with breasts and waist belts. Despite the feminine characteristics of the furnace, it was quite common for women who were capable of menstruation to be forbidden from approaching the furnaces during a smelt. In Kasungu, iron smelters were typically prevented from having sexual intercourse for up to 2 months before a smelt took place. This all came down to a general belief that menstrual blood was an impure substance that might be seen as offensive to the spirits that played such a significant role in the smelt. Because of their close involvement with the spiritual world, smiths had an interesting and important relationship with their communities. In West Africa, despite their importance to the community, iron smelters would find themselves segregated from the rest of their people, since many feared their occult power. This fear led to these separate iron smelter groups being given exclusive rights to practice metallurgy. We see this belief amongst the Mafi, whereby smiths are seen by the community as diviners and curers, yet are also considered to be unclean by the rest of their people. Unfortunately, the art of iron metallurgy in Sub-Saharan Africa suffered considerably in the early 19th century, as an influx of cheap European scrap iron outcompeted local smiths. Yet, in the modern day, we have seen a renewed effort to examine the practices of historical African iron metallurgists, allowing for the art to be partially maintained.